In the state of Virginia, an armed robbery unfolds in brutal fashion. Hands up, hands up. The criminals storm into the bank, firing their weapons indiscriminately before vanishing without a trace. With no reliable witnesses, the police and FBI are left struggling to piece together fragments of evidence, hoping to track down the culprits and bring them to justice. Unlike the dramatized version seen in movies, most bank robberies are far more discreet. Many involve little more than a note slid across the counter, with the perpetrator slipping away as quietly as they arrived. The goal is usually money, not violence. However, in Richmond, Virginia, this particular heist was an exception. 2 armed men stormed into a bank, guns blazing. "My name is Jim Carlster. I once headed the FBI's New York office," he explains. Even for seasoned investigators, the sheer brutality of this crime was shocking. The authorities knew they had to act fast before these men struck again. During the 1990s, Richmond saw about 10 bank robberies per year. Despite this frequency, none had resulted in fatalities until January 30th, 1997. That morning, employees of a small bank in the city's Eastern District began their workday as usual. Christine Edwards, a 23-year-old teller, had just arrived for her shift. Her 21-year-old colleague, Tracy Freeman, was already at her station. Alongside them, customer service representative Allison Davis and security guard Richard Hartman prepared for the day ahead. As the tellers set up their stations, a man named Stephen Reed entered the bank. Hartman, the security guard, greeted him with a friendly nod. "Good morning. How can I help you?" he asked. Neither he nor anyone else noticed the 2 men creeping into the bank's rear entrance. The first signs of trouble came from outside the bank. 2 Richmond police officers, Michael Webb and Dave Martin, were grabbing coffee before their shift when they heard gunshots. "Did you hear that?" Webb asked, snapping to attention. "Yeah, sounded like it came from the bank down the street," Martin responded, already moving toward the source of the noise. Dispatch immediately sent backup as the officers approached the bank. Rounding the building, they spotted a man lying on the ground near the parking lot. "Security guard down," Webb called into his radio. "Possible gunshot wound." Webb rushed to the injured man, finding that he was still breathing. Without hesitation, he requested an ambulance. "Send medical assistance now." Suddenly, the doors of the bank burst open, and 2 figures emerged. "Stop," Webb ordered. Before he could react, gunfire erupted. Bullets flew in all directions. Webb ducked for cover, returning fire until his magazine ran empty. Realizing he was cornered, he quickly reloaded, bracing himself for another attack. But then silence. The assailants had stopped shooting. "They had gone quiet. So I did too," Webb later recalled. "I knew they'd try to flank me. I reloaded and waited, but they never came." Martin, who had been positioned near the entrance, moved to support his partner. But in doing so, he was ambushed. The attackers caught him off guard, forcing him to surrender his weapon. In an instant, they vanished, escaping through a nearby cemetery. 2 black males, one wearing a black jacket, moving towards the Vertone Road. Martin shouted into his radio, tracking their movement as best he could. A moment later, he noticed something strange, a cloud of red dye billowing into the air. The criminals had unknowingly grabbed a bundle of booby-trap bills. As they vaulted over the cemetery wall, Martin lost sight of them. Richmond police relayed the suspect's last known direction to Henrico County officers. Despite the danger, Martin combed the area, aware that the gunman could be lurking behind any corner, but they had already disappeared into the city. A Henrico County Patrol officer was the first to arrive on the scene, scanning the area for the 2 fleeing suspects. Paramedics followed shortly after, tending to the injured security guard lying outside the bank. Meanwhile, Richmond police officers moved inside, weapons drawn. Police, stay down and don't move. Their first priority was securing the building, ensuring that no armed suspects remained inside. Once they were certain the danger had passed, they turned their attention to the bank employees. 2 tellers were on the floor, bleeding. "It's okay, you're safe now," one officer reassured them. Allison Davis, the customer service representative, had hidden under her desk during the attack. She was physically unharmed but visibly shaken, unable to speak. Paramedics quickly escorted her out. As the officers completed their sweep, emergency medical personnel entered the bank. "You can go in now." 2 wounded. A detective informed them. For 23-year-old Christine Edwards, however, help had come too late. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Detective Tom Leonard from the Homicide Division arrived to take charge of the investigation. The sheer brutality of the crime stunned even seasoned officers. "This was one of the most violent bank robberies I've seen," Leonard admitted. "We had to act fast before they struck again." As forensic teams processed the scene, investigators recovered key evidence left behind by the fleeing gunman. Among the items were a semi-automatic Lorson .380 pistol and a magazine for a Tech 9 handgun. AEK 9 unit was brought in to track the suspects. The trail led across the cemetery and into a residential street, but then abruptly ended. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, questioning residents, but no one had seen anything suspicious. Inside the bank, forensic experts gathered shell casings scattered across the floor. Most were spent, but few rounds had failed to fire. Ballistics suggested they had been fired from a Tech 9. Near the teller stations, officers discovered a backpack seemingly abandoned by the robbers. Inside, they found a green tablecloth, a bottle of lighter fluid, a book of matches, and a handwritten note that read, "Please wait 5 minutes." "We weren't sure what to make of that," Leonard admitted. Detectives also secured multiple shoe prints on the counter, carefully lifting impressions to later compare with any suspects they identified. Because the bank was federally insured, the FBI took over. Special Agent Eduardo F. arrived from the Richmond field office, reviewing security footage with Leonard. "Tom, take a look at this," he said, pointing at the screen. The surveillance system had malfunctioned, constantly switching between camera angles, making it difficult to see exactly what had happened. To reconstruct the events, investigators would need to analyze individual frames. Special Agent Eduardo and his team were determined. "Everyone working this case was committed to finding these shooters," he later said. "We were going to solve this, no matter what." The crime scene investigation stretched for hours. By the evening, at around 5:30 or 6 p.m., authorities received a new lead. Henrico County Police had responded to a burglary at a home on Art Avenue. Detectives rushed to the location, unsure if it was connected to the robbery. The homeowner's daughter had returned to find the front door forced open. Inside, the place was ransacked, with several items missing. While searching the house, officers made an unexpected discovery: a hole in the ceiling, as if someone had broken through from above. "Could someone still be up there?" an officer asked. Carefully, the team checked the attic. It was empty, but what they found inside changed the course of the investigation. As officers examined the attic, they came across a few discarded items: boots, a backpack, and a jacket. Inside the jacket's inner pocket, they found another handwritten note identical to the one in the bank. "Please wait 5 minutes." There was more. A second green tablecloth was discovered, along with several objects stained with a bright red dye, the kind used in security packs to mark stolen money. At that moment, detectives knew the burglary and the bank robbery were connected, but what they didn't know was why the suspects had chosen this particular house. Did they know someone who lived there? Had they simply broken in at random while on the run? Or was there something inside the house that had drawn them in? To get answers, they questioned the homeowner, his daughter, and her boyfriend. None of them could explain why their home had been targeted. However, detectives noticed that the boyfriend seemed unusually nervous during the interview. Meanwhile, police turned their attention back to the robbery survivors. Perhaps someone inside the bank had seen something useful. Unfortunately, none of the witnesses could provide much information. The 2 wounded employees were still in surgery, unable to speak. The only other teller had hidden under her desk for most of the attack and was too traumatized to recall anything useful. Even the customer, Stephen Reed, who had fled the scene, had little to offer. He suffered from Alzheimer's and couldn't remember what had happened. By the end of the first day, investigators felt as though they were no closer to solving the case. All they knew for certain was that 2 gunmen had stormed the bank, escaped with an undisclosed amount of cash, and left behind a trail of devastation. One teller was dead, 2 were seriously injured, and a security guard was fighting for his life. The brutal nature of the crime shocked the public. Even hardened law enforcement officials, like Assistant U.S. Attorney Nicholas Altamari, were disturbed. "She was just a kid," he said about Christine Edwards, the murdered bank teller. "And those guys, they walked in and shot her down like it was nothing. It makes me sick." Detective Tom Leonard and FBI Special Agent Eduardo F. were determined to bring the killers to justice. But with no surviving witnesses able to give statements, their only option was to reconstruct the events using security footage and forensic evidence. The problem? The bank security cameras had malfunctioned during the heist, switching erratically between angles. To make sense of footage, they had to painstakingly pull individual frames, analyzing them one by one. It was like putting together a puzzle where half the pieces were missing, one agent later recalled. Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge. As investigators reconstructed the robbery, they analyzed every detail from fragmented security footage and forensic evidence. The first thing they noticed was how quickly the attack unfolded. The bank had just opened for the day, and only a handful of people were inside: the security guard, 2 tellers, a customer service representative, and 1 customer. The footage showed the first gunman storming past the security guard without hesitation, heading straight for counter. The second gunman, however, turned his Tech 9 on the guard. From there, the violence escalated instantly. The lead robber reached the teller stations, raised his Lorsen .380, and fired twice. Both rounds hit their mark, striking the 2 employees behind counter. One of them, Christine Edwards, didn't survive. Ballistic tests later confirmed that both shots had come from the .380 found outside the bank. At the same time, the second gunman tried to fire his Tech 9, but something went wrong. The weapon jammed, and several unspent rounds fell to the floor. While he struggled to clear the malfunction, the first gunman turned and aimed at the customer service desk, firing at the terrified woman hiding behind it. His shot missed, hitting the wall behind her. That moment provided a crucial clue. The fact that an unfired round from the Tech 9 was found near the entrance suggested that both men had intended to fire indiscriminately. If the Tech 9 hadn't jammed, more people might have been killed. Outside the bank, things were just as chaotic. Customer Stephen Reed had bolted toward the exit, and security guard Richard Hartman followed. Unable to use his Lorsen .380, the lead gunman grabbed an AR-15 rifle and chased after them. A witness later confirmed seeing one of the robbers pursue Reed, firing a shot that struck him in the arm. Hartman tried to stop the gunman, but was shot multiple times himself. The guard, somehow still alive, managed to re-enter the bank through the rear entrance. But the gunmen weren't finished. They quickly grabbed stacks of cash, shoving them into a backpack. Among the bills was a die pack, rigged to explode with bright red ink once outside the bank. As they turned to leave, Hartman made one last desperate attempt to stop them, firing a shot from his service weapon. He missed. The first gunman responded by shooting him in the head. Minutes later, Officers Webb and Martin arrived at the chaotic scene. The gunman, already outside, opened fire. Webb took cover and returned fire until his magazine ran dry, at which point the attackers suddenly stopped shooting. Thinking they were trying to flank him, Webb reloaded and waited. But instead of continuing the fight, the robbers disappeared, cutting through a nearby cemetery. Moments later, Martin spotted a plume of red dye rising into the air, proof that at least some of the stolen cash had been marked. Now, with a clearer idea of how the robbery had unfolded, investigators faced a grim realization. These criminals weren't just robbers. They were cold-blooded killers who had planned to eliminate every witness in the bank. And worse, there was no reason to believe they wouldn't do it again. As the investigation pressed forward, authorities feared that the 2 gunmen might strike again. Their reckless violence suggested they wouldn't hesitate to kill if cornered. With no direct eyewitness testimony, detectives relied on a few physical clues left behind, their biggest break being the stolen money's die pack explosion. Hoping the criminals would try to spin on marked bills, the FBI alerted banks, retail stores, and businesses to report any attempts to use stained currency. But then, a different lead emerged. Assistant U.S. Attorney Nicholas Altamari recalled that a witness overheard a casual conversation at work. One woman mentioned that she believed her husband had sold some guns, including a Tech 9 and an AR-15. The information was too specific to ignore. Following this lead, FBI agents tracked down a licensed firearms dealer. At first, the seller was hesitant to cooperate, worried about being linked to crime. However, once assured that he wasn't in trouble, he provided full records of his transactions. One name stood out: Jermaine Sims. Sims had legally purchased both a Tech 9 and an AR-15 just days before the bank robbery. Investigators immediately mobilized, determined to find him. They soon learned that Sims was no longer in Richmond. He had left town shortly after the heist, but a check of his financial records revealed he was still receiving government assistance. His food stamp benefits were being collected in person at a local welfare office. FBI agents coordinated with social services staff, instructing them to notify authorities if Sims returned. Days later, he did. When Sims showed up to collect his benefits, the clerk stalled him while discreetly alerting the FBI. Minutes later, agents arrived. To their surprise, Sims didn't resist. He seemed calm, almost indifferent, as he was escorted into custody. At the station, however, his demeanor changed. He was full of anger and hostility, Altamari recalled. He had no interest in cooperating. We had to pull every word out of him. Sims denied any role in a robbery, but admitted he had purchased the weapons. He claimed to have sold them immediately afterward, though he couldn't or wouldn't remember to whom. Under mounting pressure, Sims finally broke. He revealed that he had given the guns to two men, Rushy Jones and Leffen Bobbitt. And just like that, investigators had names for their prime suspects. With the names Rushy Jones and Leffen Bobbitt now in hand, law enforcement ramped up their search efforts. Investigators combed through records, spoke to known associates, and monitored possible locations where the suspects might be hiding. Jones remained elusive, but they found a promising lead on Bobbitt. Surveillance teams tracked his last known address and set up around-the-clock monitoring. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ken Melson knew they couldn't afford to wait too long. "We needed to take them off the streets before they had the chance to hurt anyone else," he later recalled. While the FBI and police worked to gather solid evidence for an arrest, prosecutors secured warrants on separate charges to get Bobbitt and Jones into custody as quickly as possible. The break came when surveillance teams spotted Bobbitt, leaving his home and boarding a city bus. Agents moved in immediately, coordinating a takedown at the next stop. As the bus came to a halt, officers swarmed in, surrounding the vehicle from all sides. "Bobbitt, you're under arrest." With no way out, Bobbitt surrendered without a fight. A search of his home turned up more incriminating evidence, including a gun manual for a Lorson .380, the same model used to kill bank teller Christine Edwards. Ballistic tests confirmed that spent shell casings found in his home matched those from the murder weapon. Meanwhile, Jones was still at large. Weeks passed with no sign of him. Then, a tipster contacted authorities. A man matching Jones's description had been spotted trying to use red-stained money at a local store. FBI agents worked fast, narrowing down his potential hiding spots. Finally, they pinpointed a rundown apartment complex in Richmond's South Side. With a tactical unit in place, law enforcement prepared for a high-risk arrest. At 5 a.m., they moved in, navigating the dimly lit hallways. The team made their way to the suspect's unit. Just as they reached the door, an informant inside the building whispered a warning. "He's in the kitchen. He has a gun." That changed everything. If Jones was armed, the situation could turn deadly. Officers adjusted their approach, using flashbangs to disorient him before breaching the apartment. But Jones wasn't in the kitchen. A quick search of the rooms revealed he had locked himself in the bathroom. "Jones, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up." For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, the door creaked open. To everyone's relief, Jones emerged unarmed. He surrendered without a fight. A later search of the apartment revealed the gun he had hidden, a broken firearm with a damaged firing pin. Had it been functional, the arrest might have played out very differently. With both gunmen in custody, prosecutors wasted no time bringing charges. Their trial began on February 25, 1998. Because none of the surviving witnesses could testify, either due to trauma or injury, the prosecution relied heavily on forensic evidence and security footage. Ken Melson and his team knew they had to make the case clear for the jury. "We had to recreate the crime scene in a way that made the horror of it undeniable," he said. Using digital reconstructions, ballistics analysis, and expert testimony, the prosecution laid out a step-by-step account of robbery and murders. After a 6-day trial, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty on all charges. Jones and Bobbitt received life sentences without parole. Jermaine Sims, though he hadn't pulled the trigger, was convicted of conspiracy, aiding and abetting murder, and multiple firearm violations. He too was sentenced to life in prison. For the victims and their families, justice had finally been served. The people of Richmond could breathe easier knowing that these violent criminals would never walk free again.